everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a wrap-up for the months of January and February. I completely forgot to do one for January. School kind of hit me in the face. So here we are to do a wrap-up of 18 books that I read in 2 months. Without much more nonsense, we're gonna get right in. I don't have any of the books with me, so I'm just gonna stick up an image right hither. Let me move. I'm gonna stick up an image right hither for you to look at while I talk. And I'm gonna try and keep this short, but that's gonna be impossible. We're talking about 18 books. First book that I read in January of 2018 was Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. It was cute and amazing and very heartwarming. Eliza and Her Monsters is about this young girl in high school named Eliza who kind of leads a double life. She is a reclusive young high schooler with no friends and crippling social anxiety, but online she is a famous webcomic artist, which happens to have like millions of followers, to the point where some of them actually exist in her school. Her life has been very much avoiding contact with people in school and then living it out on the internet, and all of this kind of gets shaken up when a new guy who transfers into her school, and he turns out to be one of the most popular fanfiction writers for her webcomic. And it's kind of this struggle between whether or not she wants to tell him or not. They obviously do befriend each other, because what's the point of the book if they don't? And it's about her working through her anxiety, about figuring out where she falls in her identity, and just this very heartwarming and beautiful book about friendship, relationships, and self-existence and love. Couple of trigger warnings: crippling anxiety, panic attacks, suicide attempts, death of a family member, and I think cyberbullying. That's all I remember. It was a really cute book. I could relate to it a lot. I felt like it was really well written and researched, and just the characters were so realistic and understood, and I thought it was a great book. If you're in the mood for a good contemporary right now, I'd say go for that. It is a little bit on the heavier side for emotions, but the rest of it is just so nice to read. I thought it was a great opening to the year of 2018. The year hasn't gone that great, but my reading schedule has, and I think that was because I started off with Eliza and Her Monsters. Next book that I read in 2018 is She Sings of Old, Unhappy, Far-Off Things by Karen J. Werlinger. I'm glad I got that in the first try. So I've done a full spoilery review for this book. I will link it down in the description box. I gave this book a 2.75 stars. I'm like in between that like 2 and 3 range, fluctuating depending on the mood and like how I think about it. So it kind of falls there. All I will say is that I liked the book, but there were some big ass issues with it. Quick summary, the book follows one main character, Margaret, who is in her mid-40s, probably 50s. She is a PhD and a professor of romance literature at a religious institution of higher education. Her husband has a massive legacy there, but he's also on his way out due to a terminal illness, and she's trying to figure out where she lies in terms of her career, because a lot of people think that her career was built up on the legacy of her husband, who's got a big name at this university. And she's just having a hard time, you know, what with the dying husband and midlife crisis and all of that. And she meets Wick, who is 35-something, very accomplished, very educated, but has decided to become a gardener. And Wick kind of befriends Margaret as Wick, you know, gardens for Margaret's estate, and they kind of build a relationship, become friends, build each other up, and then build a relationship, obviously. I didn't use pronouns in this, so I'm going to be straightforward. This is a lesbian romance. I also didn't pick it up until like the 5th or 6th page in, because Wick you'd expect is a dude's name, but no. We all have prejudices. We all have to work on that. It came as a surprise to me, very pleasant surprise. And in that terms, like the romance, the queer romance was just the best thing ever. My issues lie a little bit with like pedophilia excuse. And all of that I go into in my long spoilery review. So if you want to know more, go watch that. It is a good book in terms of romance. That I will give it. Next book that I read in January was One Dark Throne by Kendare Blake. This is the second book, the follow-up book to Three Dark Crowns, and I think it's going to be a trilogy. I give this book 5 out of 5 stars. It is bomb as fuck. This series is just literally the wildest stuff you've ever read. So, premise of the first book I'm going to give you, because spoilers all the way through the second book. It is about these triplets who are vying for the throne. They live on an island that has a magical system of its own, and every queen gives birth to triplets. These triplets are raised together up until a certain age, until they start manifesting their powers. Then, depending on the power they get, they're adopted by that faction on the island who raises them to, like, strengthen their powers, so on and so forth, until these 3 girls turn 16, then they duke it out, and the one who doesn't die becomes the next queen. It is as morbid as it sounds. Side note, forgot to mention, this island is a matriarchy. So the magic system, the naturalists who can control animals of sorts, I'd say they have familiars a la Golden Compass. Then there's the elementalists who can control elements of nature, water, fire, wind, earth, the usual, and poisoners who have healing abilities or are good healers. Not like magical healing abilities, they just know their way around herbs and medicine, and can also ingest poisons that won't affect them at all. So our 3 queens, Arsinoe, Mirabella, and Catherine, are coming of age and are living with their factions and are now about to, like, fucking get into it. It is just the wildest stuff ever. I love this series so much. It is so innovative. It is so incredible. In 2 books, this world has freaking doubled in size, not only in terms of the magic system, but also in terms of, like, territory that we're reaching, and that is just so freaking good. I do have one issue with it, is that despite this island being a matriarchy, it still kind of feels like it was, like, based off patriarchal society, but we're literally all living in a patriarchal society. So who am I to criticize someone who, you know, hasn't 100% detached themselves from that? I think it was a good attempt. Everything else about this book is just beyond stellar. 5 out of 5 stars for both the books. I think the 2 bind-up novellas are coming out in August or something like that, and I cannot wait. Next book I'm going to talk about is The Red Queen, Glass Sword, and King's Cage all at once, just because it's easier. I read Red Queen and Glass Sword in January, King's Cage in Feb, but we're going to talk about them together. I gave Red Queen 3 stars, Glass Sword 3 stars, and King's Cage 3.5, 4-ish stars. They were okay, not the best. Definitely agree that they're overhyped, for sure. The premise of this story is that we're living in, like, this, our main character, Mare, lives in this fantasy world where people are divided based on the type of blood they have. You can either be a red blood, and these are people who are the lower caste. They're considered lowly, unworthy, they live in poverty, they're oppressed, they're forced into, like, menial labor tasks, the usual. And then there's the silver bloods who are royalty, middle class, gentry, so on and so forth, the way royalty and a monarchy works. And they also have powers attributed to their blood. So we follow our main character, Mare, who is a red blood. And after her sister gets into a tragic accident and loses her job, Mare decides to take on work in the royal household as a maid to make money for her family. Things kind of blow up over there after something rather explosive happens. I don't know if it's part of the book summary, so I'm just not going to mention it. And, you know, it kind of takes off there. Glass Sword builds on that. Dystopia, fantasy narrative, and then King's Cage builds on top of that as well. I thought that the progression from book to book was definitely an improvement in the way the author wrote. Victoria Aveyard wrote the books. But consistently throughout all three, I thought this idea of blood types paralleling racism in our world fell a little bit short, mainly because it felt like majority of the cast of characters were still white. And I don't understand how a book that critiques race relations in modern day fails to pull through with actual representation to actually like level out the playing field before you build on like a different set of race relations. But not to say that it isn't diverse. There are diverse characters, and I think the main character and her family might actually be brown. I don't know if they're ethnically based as Native American, Brown Latino, or South American / Middle Eastern. There's no specificity in the names or like the ethnic way that these people exist, which is also a big issue that I had with the series. Like, all the names are like white people names. Other than that, I thought the politics of it were really interesting, and they were starting to get more and more interesting. I thought the series was kind of like a step above from Kiera Cass's Selection series, you know, sans the fucking Bachelor aspect of it. It was interesting, it's getting interesting, and I really do want to read the 4th book, so like it's hooked me enough for me to get into that. It's just not the most stellar thing ever. I also did read these books on audiobook, and I thought the audiobook narrator was just, I guess annoying is correct, because the main character is like 17, 18. And I know I was annoying back then. I enjoyed the books more as audiobooks than I ever would have if they were physical copies. I think the physical copies would have just pissed me the fuck off. Next series that I'm going to talk about, again, I'm going to talk about the entire series at once, is the Shatter Me trilogy by Tahira Mafi. I read all 3 of them in the month of January. I gave Shatter Me 3 stars, Unravel Me gets 4 stars, and then Ignite Me also gets 4 stars. So, summary of the series, if you don't already know, thanks to Whitney from Witty Novels, who's the big-ass fan of this series, then you would like to know that this book is set in a dystopia world after our Earth goes through catastrophic environmental changes where wildlife, flora and fauna are dying out, resources are scarce, and the world is under the control of the Reestablishment, who are a dystopian government system. Our main character, Juliet, happens to have the powers to kill anyone that she touches on direct skin contact. And so this poor girl is ostracized because, you know, she's essentially a murderer, and she's put into an asylum and isolated for a long-ass time. Her self-hatred, self-loathing are just sky fucking high. I feel so bad for her. But her life kind of like exits the asylum and enters into the realm of the Reestablishment after she gets a roommate who helps her get out of the asylum. I think Tahira Mafi's writing style is just exquisite. There were some really beautiful lines in there, and the use of repetition and scratch out marks. There are like strike through marks in the book that show Juliet's thought process and like her nervousness and all of that. I think the concept of the way the book was written is just exquisite, and the wording and the lyricism in it is just beyond amazing. There were some really, really dumb lines as well. I think there was something about like my stomach was hanging off my shoelaces, like I don't know how that's possible, but okay. Some of them were weird, but for the most part, it's just really great. The romance that happens throughout the arc of the 3 books is kind of great, and I just loved the characters overall. I think the world is a little bit limited to what happens inside Juliet's head, but Restore Me is coming out literally in like 6 days, not even 6 days, like 4 days from the day I'm filming this. And it's definitely going to expand. So read up on these 3 books if you actually want to get to Restore Me. Whitney will tell you the same thing. Next book that I read in January was Dear Martin by Nick Stone. This book, again, is inspired by a lot of the shootings of young black kids in America. Real fucked up, that is. And it kind of expands on that idea of Black Lives Matter and young black kids just needing the opportunity to be children. So we follow our main character, Justice, who, after reading Martin Luther King's prose, decides to start writing letters to Dr. King as a sort of a journal entry and to enact Dr. King's practices of peace into his daily life. Things kind of turn around after, in the very beginning of the book, he gets apprehended by a police officer while he tries to help out his drunk ex-girlfriend, get into her car. So that's his first really dark encounter with police brutality and injustice of the system. And more things happen exactly as you expect they would in terms of like what actually is related to the Black Lives Matter movement. I kind of won't say what, because it is actually what happens halfway through the book, and I think that was just like, wow, okay, that's a little bit late, but it happens, and then it proceeds. I give this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I really thought it was exquisite. Very small, but this tiny book packs a big, mean punch. It's very, very, very different from The Hate U Give. I can't help but compare it, because that's just, we have 2, maybe 3 books that talk about this current issue. Maybe 2, maybe 3 books, at least the ones that I've read. So I can't help but compare it, and I really shouldn't, because that's a problem. They're just so wildly different, and although they talk about similar things, have such incredibly different takes on it. Obviously the take is that don't fucking kill for no goddamn reason, but the way they approach it is just 2 different avenues, and it's great and beautiful, and I think these books are really needed. I've seen a lot of reviews on Goodreads that seem to pick on the fact that the main character is a guy, and a lot of the things that come out of a guy's mouth are sexist, despite being written by a woman author. But honestly, we're talking about a teenage boy with hormones. Everything that came out of that kid's mouth and was written down into that book is genuinely what a hormonal teenager would say, not what a sexist teenager or person would say. That's just my 2 piece on what I've seen. Still a great book. Will stand by the fact that it is one of the most fantastic books I've read in 2018, and it's literally just 2 months in. So I recommend you read that. It is great. Next book that I read in January of 2018 was Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. This book follows our main character, Aza, who has obsessive-compulsive disorder, and she and her best friend, Daisy, kind of get into this local mystery of one of her old childhood friend's fathers who disappears after being accused of money laundering, is that the word? Fraud, I think bank fraud or something like that. They try to unravel this mystery and figure out what happened to try and get a monetary award. I gave Turtles All the Way Down 4 stars. As usual, John Green's writings does not suit the sound of a 14 to 18-year-old. Teenagers obviously don't talk like that, but it's also literally fiction, so the author can do whatever the fuck they want in their books. That's my frank opinion. So I don't kind of hold that against him. What I did have issues with was that the plot line kind of like, the plot of this mystery of the missing billionaire kind of fell through a lot in the middle of the book and only picked up at the end. But that happened because this OCD and, you know, coping with mental illness and therapy and all of that kind of took the forefront of the main character's life. Well and good, I think. That was like an executive decision that needed to be made. Possibly a subplot could have been chosen differently so that the focus could have stayed on talking about mental illness, but I actually really liked how subtle this secondary narrative of the missing billionaire was. There's also a short romance, But it's so much more about Aza than it is about anyone else in this book. I will say, Daisy is a self-absorbed fucking dickhead of a best friend, and everyone agrees with this, I think. I will say, it is extremely, extremely triggering in terms of obsessive-compulsive disorder, in terms of social anxiety, and in terms of shitty-ass friends. We also have a couple of dead parents, so trigger warning. The last book that I read in January was Nowhere Girls by Amy Reed. So this book follows our main character, Grace, body representation. She is a fat main character. She moves into the house of a young girl who was run out of town for accusing the football player or someone like that of raping her, of gang raping her. Grace learns about this huge scandal through clues that were left in her household that belonged to the girl who was run out of town, and also through things that she hears in school. So she and the two girls she befriends, Rosina, who's a lesbian Latina, and Erin either is on the spectrum, has Asperger's, or is autistic. I forgot what they mentioned about it, but she's on the spectrum. The three of them kind of attempt to get justice for this girl who was hurt so badly by boys in her school and by the institution of this town in general. It is such an empowering book. I read this book, Nowhere Girls, significantly after the time period that I read Moxie, but I couldn't help but think of Moxie as like a precursor to Nowhere Girls. They're not related, the authors are different, but I thought Moxie was like level 1 feminist, and then like after you get into the theories of feminism, the shit that happens, you hit Nowhere Girls with like, that one cuts fucking deep. Like, it is a little bit more hardcore than Moxie. So like there's definitely like an aging process that needs to happen between these two books, but they're very similar in their message and they're very similar in their execution. These two books just work so beautifully together in terms of their message. I thought they were gorgeous. I thought Nowhere Girls was just exquisite in what it did. Trigger warnings for rape, for gang rape, for social anxiety, for bullying, for sexual harassment. I think gender identity dysphoria, yeah, that's all I can think about again. Obviously, there's definitely more that I definitely would have missed as someone who's not very nuanced in these things. Beware, look up more trigger warnings if you feel like something in this book might get to you. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It is just incredibly well done. I do suggest that you read Moxie before Nowhere Girls, though. Thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna go turn the AC in this apartment back now and curl up.